Yeah. Yeah.
Don't steal my
So it sounds like he must be coming.
Morning.
My friend. Oh, they're not.
Well, no, what?
You're gonna be in your way, right? No, you're fine. That's better.
Okay.
You sure? I know it's hard, like.
One,
Okay.
I think probably will.
Well, it's, you can put it,
Same. I just need to get his,
it's like this side is well represented
Well,
today.
not quite.
Don't forget
I would never.
yes, you would. Yes, you would.
Water.
Okay,
okay.
for the book, for the women's Bible study, for the book,
Yeah,
should I just go and buy my own?
you can do it however you want.
Okay.
I
I
bought,
never saw this one, which is my,
Yeah, so Mike is ready to,
but
yeah, I mean, he will, he possibly, if,
do you have extras that I can give?
I'm gonna be placing an order.
find a place.
Okay.
I've just, as people are giving me money, I'm ordering because it comes in like
Michael told me
How much are they?
because
Yeah.
don't work,
Okay.
that they come.
they're like $17.99 plus tax, and then, so we just
Shipping and
rounded up to
everything.
20.
That
Because we have to pay for the video access too, so, we just thought that would kind of cover some of
Or
that.
something, Mike.
Okay.
Or, you know, it seems like it's a lot harder to, you know. Yep. Well, she's on.
Before you all get really hunkered into your chairs,
A year ahead.
I got
I
pictures.
need this time off.
You may not be able to see them
Yeah, true.
at a 180-degree angle.
Yeah.
You might want to try to find that 90 to 110 angle.
Good morning.
Like me.
We're flexible enough here at Messiah, we don't mind switching this, that's right. You already got a good spot. Just if you can see the screen, just to, you got a show. Yeah.
Remember how to jump a cutter. Yeah. Figured it out.
Just have like boxes.
That needs to be on.
Jumps for dummies.
It's 9:30 on the dot. Now, this doesn't normally happen that we start at 9:30 at the dot, but I'll kick it over to you, Pastor Flunker. You can introduce yourself since you got the mic.
Before I introduce myself, can I ask just a nice, simple cultural question? Do you not start at 9:30 on the dot? This is multiple choice, I'll make it easy for you. Because, A, pastor preaches too long. B, you don't start worship at 8:30. Or C, pastor just really, really loves liturgy so much that he gives you like 48 minutes of liturgy.
D, we talk too much.
D, you talk too much. Oh, wow.
We're partying around.
Pastor Graham, either they really love you or you're still in the honeymoon stage that they're really not going to throw you under the bus.
Well, if you ask this lady, my honeymoon stage ended like month one.
No more extensions.
Ordinarily, they're ready to really throw pastor under the bus, especially the preaching part. Oh, he just preaches so long. Now, and today I wondered if maybe he thought that the guest preacher would preach really, really long, and that's why he kind of made the service all about the word and not so much about liturgy. Okay. So we're here on quote-unquote time, giving me about as much of the 45 to 50 minutes as I can take. So we're going to fill it up. My name is Pastor Tim Flunker. I serve as the Hispanic Outreach Consultant for the Board for Home Missions of the Wisconsin Synod. Really, the title means nothing. What I'm here to do is to help you look at your community through intercultural eyes. To do that, we start with God's Word. And to do that, I need to have a clicker that works. Come on. There we go. 2 Corinthians chapter 5. Since a few of you might be on the peripheral of reading, I'll read it out loud. God has done it all. He reconciled us unto himself through Christ and gave us the task of proclaiming this reconciliation, namely that in Christ God reconciled the world to himself, not by counting their sins against them, and he put into our hands the message of reconciliation. Therefore we are ambassadors of Christ. It is as if God were pleading through us. We plead with you on behalf of Christ. Be reconciled to God. God made him who did not know sin to be sin for us, so that in him we might become the righteous before God. According to this verses, this selection, what causes us to witness? What's the underlying factor? What's the motivation? And I'll give you a hint. 5 words. God has done it all. Why does that move us to? Why does that motivate us? So just sit back, relax, drink your coffee, watch the television, you'll be okay? Okay. In other words, there's nothing else for us to do for our salvation. Heaven is won for us. Our eternal life has been guaranteed by nothing that we do, which is the opposite message of the world. What does the world say? I don't care what name of religion you put in there, it's all the same at the bottom. What does the world say? You got to do stuff, something. Pick your flavor of the month and I'll tell you what they say you have to do. For some people, maybe you got to pray more. Got to pray to the saints. For some people, it might be, you just have to be above average. By above average, I mean 50.000001. Because the 49.99999 are going to hell, and the 50.00001 are going to heaven. So just found yourself there. Found yourself there. For others, it may be, you got to pay the piper. You got to tithe. You got to do all these things. You got to do mission trips. You have to be visible in the work. And all of those things add up to what? I mean, what's the end result of you and I trying to reach heaven on our own? What's the end result? Yeah, really. Simple enough, isn't it? We don't get to heaven. Now, before we get to hell, we might be frustrated. We might be deluded. Most of the world is clueless. They think they're close to heaven, but they're clueless. And I know that there are a lot of scenarios that you might hear or see from preachers that say, oh yeah, there's going to be a lot of crying and a lot of weeping and a lot of, oh, what have I done when Jesus comes back to earth. I think there are going to be just as many people going like, I know. Especially when they see the line of saints saying, yeah, I'm going because of Jesus' blood, not because of me. And they're going to say, was that easy? Because they're clueless. You and I have a unique motivation. God has done it all. Now, what does that motivate us to do? In other words, how do we witness? This section has a one-word answer. Trying to make it easy for y'all this morning. I know that 9:30 Mountain Time Zone, Nampa, might be a little bit to get the cobwebs going. I doubt that anybody went out and ran 5 miles this morning to really get the endorphins going or anything. Somebody did. Okay, I'm not seeing anything. Maybe wrestling with your kid might be the equivalent of running for 5 miles. It was when I was there with that kind of cow. One word answer. What does God want us to be? How do we witness? Yeah, you're saying it. Say it out loud so the rest of them can hear it.
Ambassador.
You're ambassadors. What's an ambassador? Good answer. Till you kind of know what the word means. What's an ambassador? A representative. Good. I love that definition. Can an ambassador make up his own message? No, he'll get fired. Can an ambassador change the message because he might feel a little uncomfortable delivering the message? He shouldn't. Otherwise, he's not being a good ambassador. An ambassador is a representative. Sometimes I use the word a go-between. I'll take the message that is given to me and I'll take it to the person I need to take it to. Is that an easy job? Okay, not always. I like to put it, the not always, into what I call the best Lutheran answer ever. And I will share this with you so you can use this with your pastor in the future. The best Lutheran answer is yes and no. Almost any question your pastor asks you, you can say yes and no. Because it all depends on the situation. Is it easy? Yeah, being an ambassador is easy. I don't have to think. I just have to carry a message to wherever my boss tells me to go. Is it hard? Yeah, I may not like the person I'm taking a message to. Or it may be in a difficult situation. Anybody remember 1991 and the Gulf War that happened at that time? Any historians, any people alive in that era? Yeah. Do you remember who the ambassador to Iraq was at that time? It was a lady.
Condoleezza Rice.
That wasn't Condoleezza. Condoleezza was Secretary of State. Actually, she was Secretary of State. Yeah, she's Secretary of State for Bush 43, not Bush 41. It was a lady. I can't remember her name right now. But imagine a boss taking a lady and saying, now go take this message to Saddam Hussein. You think she walked in saying, oh goody, this is something I like to do? No. And what was the boss's message? Get out of Kuwait or you're going down. Not the nicest of message to break. It's a very in-your-face, defiant message. She did it. She did it even though she probably was a little bit nervous. And she did it even though she probably thought, this guy's not even going to listen to my message. He's going to dismiss it. He's going to do whatever. But she did it. You and I are ambassadors for your favorite football team? Is that the message you want to take? Yeah, go Boise State. Go Bluefield. Is that the message you want to take? No. Your favorite pastime? What are you ambassadors for?
Jesus.
Jesus! That's by the way, that's a second Lutheran answer. Whenever you're in trouble, just say Jesus. We're ambassadors for Christ. What's the message that we need to take? What's the message that we can't change? Simply?
The gospel.
The gospel. In the verse, what's the message? Reconciliation. Big word. What does reconciliation mean? Yeah, now you're not so smart. No, I'm joking.
Friend, not enemy.
Friend, not enemy. Okay, I can see that.
Agreed.
Somehow it's got to be on the same level, right? Whether the concept of reconciliation is balance, and I don't like balance because there seems to be a give. So if I'm going to be reconciled to God, on a spectrum, where is God? Way up here. Perfect, right? Where am I? Below my boot. It's being stepped on. How can I be reconciled to God? Somehow or another, we need to be on that same plane. You know what? Most of Christianity says, well, you climb up the ladder a bit and God will come down the ladder, and that's how you're reconciled. Some of Christianity will say, well, there's really not much you can do to be reconciled, so hopefully you got some people who love you and will pray for you, and maybe after you die, you'll be reconciled. And other Christianity will say, well, to be reconciled with God, that's because God comes right down to where you are and says, I don't care who you are, I'm here. But what does the verse say, and what is reconciliation truly? If God's way up here and I'm way down here, what happens? Christ goes down, reaches me from underneath my boot, and he brings me all the way up to him, puts me exactly with God, and says, God, take him. Why? Because I have done it all. Not this guy's works, not this guy's deeds, not this guy's money, not this guy's value, but my value, Christ's value. Is that a tough message? Yes and no. So you got to go back to the Lutheran answer. Yes and no. Sometimes it's an easy message for an individual who's been struggling their entire life to become right with God, and you say, you can't be right with God. God has done it all. Oh, wow, weight lifted. And for other people, most of my ministry has happened among Hispanic Catholics. That's a tough message. Because Hispanic Catholics have been bred into their brain, I got to do something. And don't take that away from me. Oh, God has done it all. God can't do it all. I've got to do something. That's a tough message. So, how do we do that as ambassadors? And how do we do that when our community is different from us? That's my role in the Synod. To help congregations understand these terms and to put them into practice. The first list, cross-cultural, multicultural, and intercultural. I could spend the rest of the Bible class doing that list and trying to understand it. Very simply, cross-cultural ministry is when you leave your culture and go into another culture and you try to stop being who you are. I did that as a kid. I did that as an adult. It's not easy. It's sometimes very, very fun. But it's not easy. But that's where you leave a majority position and you go into a minority position. Let's all go to Mexico City right now. I'll drop you off on the south side of the Zócalo and I'll say, see you at the airport. That's cross-cultural. If you know Spanish well, like El Pastor here, he'll probably get to the airport about the same time I do. The rest of you are cursing me in your head. Until you remember a few movies and you realize, no, every Volkswagen here is a taxi. I'll stop them, negotiate a fee, throw a couple bills in front of them and say, aeropuerto, and they'll take me. You'll be there. That's cross-cultural. Multicultural is when it's fairly balanced, but it's separated. So you have a church organization, and inside that church, you have the Hispanics over here, you have the Vietnamese over here, you have the Sudanese over here, and you have the Anglos right here. And they're together, but they're not. They're under the same roof, but maybe what they do is one good potluck a year. Irvin can say, oh yeah, I like that spicy Vietnamese, but no, stay away from that Hispanic stuff. That'll burn a hole in your stomach. That's multicultural. And for the longest time in the Wisconsin Synod, that's the way we thought. In fact, just down the road, you have a ministry that was started on the basis of multicultural reality. What we're seeing today is that perhaps that does not have the best long-term viability and sustainability. So we started to work with intercultural ministry. In other words, we recognize there are cultural differences. In fact, in this room right now, as many people as are here, I'll take that times 2, that's how many cultures are in this room. We're all different cultures. But we all generally attempt to speak the same language. Some of us do it as native Idahoans. Some of us walk in from the plains and say, hey, you sound like you're from Wisconsin. Okay. But we're coming together under one roof. And we are together. In fact, the emphasis is on assimilation. where we not just say we're together, we act like we're together. We do things together. We do not divide by language or race. But we recognize, well, what's the common language? All of us speak English, so we use it. We may all bring different aspects of our culture into the mix, but we're together. We come together, and we don't think separate. That's why sometimes people will call me and say, oh yeah, you're the Hispanic guy. Help us reach out to Hispanics. I will, but it may not be with the end result that you have in your mind. Oh good, pastor speaks Spanish. Yay, pastor, go reach the Hispanics. That's actually not what I have in mind. And that's not what we're doing in the United States. What we're doing in the United States is, come on, all right. That's why I told you I had to buy a new clicker. What we're doing in the United States is understanding that we basically have two paths to follow. We either set an ethnic minority up to handle everything by themselves as best as they can, or we come together and we welcome an ethnic minority into our majority and become very aware of what they can bring to the table to enrich us. Because we recognize that there is a common language. May not always be at the same efficiency. May not always be the same dialect. But there is a common language. And it's not done as a paternalistic concept. Well, you're in the U.S. now, you have to speak English. In fact, that to me, historically, makes no sense. When somebody tells me, oh, we need to have the official language of this state or this area be English, and it needs to be a law. I say, that's the dumbest thing you can do, and that tells me you were not paying attention in third grade. Because when we all studied history in third grade, we all learned that a lot of different nations came to the United States throughout its 400 years, going all the way back to the 1600s. And yet today, what's the one language that is spoken throughout the entire United States?
American English.
Let's just say English. I understand what you mean by American English, but unless you have spent 15 years living in Texas, they might disagree with you. Because they would say Texas English. I'll just call it English. Yes, it differs from British English, but it is English. It's a common denominator. And it wasn't done because someone held a gun to the head. On the contrary, it was done very, very naturally. And if you look at that today, the transition into the English language happens so much quicker and so much under the radar than it did perhaps 100 years ago. I know most of our Anglo ancestors were from Northern Europe. If we trace our history back, and they came to the United States in the middle 1800s, maybe in the early 1800s, they spoke their native language for a whole generation, perhaps without even learning English. My great-great-great-grandfather on my dad's side left Germany because of the Prussian Union in 1832. Came to Wisconsin. He never spoke any English. He came to Wisconsin, I believe, when he was about 35, 36 years old. Never spoke English. Didn't have to. For 25 years when he lived in Hortonville, Wisconsin, they didn't speak English. They were isolated, and that was fine. It was his grandchildren that didn't speak any German. It took 3 generations to move from German to English. Today, it doesn't even take 1 generation. Young person comes to the United States, middle-aged person comes to the United States, within 5 years they're bilingual. They're bilingual. Now, to a varying degree, but they're bilingual. It's happening in a generation or less. And no one's holding a gun to their face. Unless you call multimedia, television, and radio a gun. Then yes, there is a gun to their face. Because that's how they absorb themselves in the United States, is through the media. And the media done is primarily in English. So you're going to end up with pictures like this. In fact, these pictures that are coming up are what I envision Wisconsin Synod should look like. On this particular picture, I always challenge people, find the Hispanics. Because there are only 2 Hispanics who speak Spanish in this picture. And I'm one of them. And yet that baptism on that particular day 12 years ago was done in both languages. I spoke English, and there was a pamphlet in Spanish for the one person who's not in the picture who spoke only Spanish. We did everything in English, but we had something for them to have in their hands. And yet they came together over a baptism. Often, baptism is a uniting factor, especially among Hispanics because of their traditional Catholic background. They want baptism for the children. They don't understand what baptism is. They have a traditional concept of baptism, so they want it sometime between the ages of 1 and 3. They want to have the party, they want to bring everybody together, but when they go to the Catholic Church, whom they think should do it, the Catholic Church says, yeah, that's great, where's the $500? It's about what the Catholic Church charges roughly, given for inflation. 5 years ago it was $300. I'm sorry, Pastor, how much do you charge here?
You only charge 2. No, I'm just kidding.
You only
No.
charge 2? Okay. That's good, you're ahead of the curve. You're ahead
Great.
of the curve.
It's great.
That's the point. Baptism is free. So one of the key inroads is to offer something other people charge for that we know is free. There's a church in Santo Tomas in Phoenix, Arizona. They do between 50 and 60 baptisms a year. Half of their church are from people who came because of the free baptism and said, this is great, and then they study with the pastor. Intercultural means also intergenerational. And very often, the kid who walks in because they came with their parents in the United States at the age of 2, at 3.5 years old, they're being babysat while the parents are learning some English, taught by the church. After a while, the people that are babysitting say, yeah, the kid doesn't want to speak Spanish anymore. Because they spend time with someone else who's speaking English. But being intercultural means that we can ask for and relate to the culture of the person who's coming. A wonderful, unique idea, which you probably already know about, is celebrating anything with a piñata. Because a piñata takes care of 2 primal desires that we have. To hit something hard and to eat something sweet. So let's go beat up a paper mache animal or star, depending on the season, and then let's wait for everything to fall. And then let's throw our kids in there like they're diving on landmines so they can get the candy and bring it back to us. That's great. None of us would have had that idea on our own, but we become intercultural. We open up with them. And they share what they like with us. And by doing that, we end up coming a whole lot closer together, a whole lot sooner.
Could you go back to that other picture? Do
Yes.
you recognize that pickup truck? And the man sticking out of the pickup truck?
I do.
Yeah, I didn't know you were going to have that picture. Hace 6 años.
Hace 6 años, sí. I threw a couple of these pictures in here, and there'll be some towards the end, because part of our ministry working with the intercultural reality is on the border. So much so that the people just south of the border, crossing from Arizona into Mexico, relate better when we come in with an intercultural mentality. And that's what we're doing here. we're relating to them. Yeah, we may use a little bit more Spanish. There are times when I'm walking through this group and I'll have people stop and want to practice their English with me. Or ask me about my culture, because there's a desire to come together. And in the end, it is my humble opinion and my direction that when we come together for worship, it's done as a group. Not separate but equal. Yeah, everyone who has a Spanish background, go over here. Why? Because there are many people who have a Spanish background, they won't understand half of what Pastor says in Spanish. In fact, in the United States, all the 20 places that are working with a worship service or a connection in Spanish, we do not teach catechism in Spanish in the United States. In fact, I can say even more strongly, we can't teach catechism in Spanish in the United States because the kids would not understand it. Even a place like Phoenix, Arizona, where the community that we're doing it in is 89% Hispanic. 10 years ago, the pastor who was there started out his catechism class at the beginning of the year in fall. And he did what he always did. He launched into a long gospel presentation. He did it all in Spanish. He even elicited a few answers. Went for 45 minutes, got to the end, and said, okay, we'll see you next time. Here's your assignment. Memorize this. Young lady in the back of the room raised her hand and said, Pastor, can you repeat that in English? Because most of us didn't understand it. And he was a clear preacher, clear teacher. But because the kids were so immersed in the United States, their English was far stronger than their Spanish. They all spoke Spanish. I call it Español casero, home Spanish. They can relate to the grandparents primarily. It's very, very often when I walk into a house to sit down and talk to a parent where I can hear the kids asking the question in English and the parents answering in Spanish, and both understand. But the kids don't want to speak Spanish because they don't have that fluency like the parents do. And the parents don't want to speak English because they're afraid that the kids will make fun of them because they make a mistake, they don't get quite the order in the sequence, they have an accent that does not quite mesh, they put the wrong emphasis on the wrong syllable, and then they get flat. So they speak, and it's understood. Because they have a common reality. So there's a lot of teaching that's going on. Teaching individuals, teaching leaders to think interculturally. And that's what we're doing in the United States. We have 11 places that have a worship service in Spanish and in English, and there's only one pastor there. Which means that every Sunday morning, he preaches in English, he preaches in Spanish. And I tell them, don't tell me how many Spanish came, don't tell me how many came to English service, just give me a number at the end of the day. Because in many of these locations, one Sunday the family will be in the English service, next Sunday they'll be in the Spanish service. We've got 4 locations where we have a bilingual man and an English speaker, because there's a lot of work going on. We've got 2 locations where there's so much work going on that both men are bilingual. They both speak Spanish and English fluently. And we have 1 location where we have a man who does not speak any English. He's got to be paired with a Hispanic person. In fact, there's the man right there, Frank Rosillo. Frank Rosillo was a Cuban gynecologist. One thing about Cuba, socialism notwithstanding, Cuba has probably the best medical training system in the world. Doctors, nurses, professors of anatomy coming out of Cuba, they not just know their stuff, they're skilled at it. So Frank got led into this very early on. He became an OBGYN. In fact, he was a regional doctor where he had to go to 5 or 6 different locations, 20 to 30 kilometers apart from each one. And in one of the locations, he was walking from the little commune that they have for the doctors and nurses to stay overnight. He was walking down to the local place where he had to see his women that day, and he walked by a Lutheran church service. As he tells it, there were about 12 people in there, 12 to 15 people, and they were singing. And Pastor, well, at this time he was just Dr. Cosillo, said, well, I've never heard of religious people singing. So he stopped and listened. And they were singing, Jesus Loves Me. And Pastor Frank Cosillo's first question was, who is Jesus? Or as we say in Spanish, ¿Quién es Jesús? Which is a silly question for anybody who speaks Spanish to ask, because virtually everybody in Latin America has their name Jesus in there someplace. And I'll tell you why that is. Because every person in Latin America has 4 names. They have their given name, the name their parents really want them to be called. That lasts about a year. They have their nickname, which shows up about 18 months to 2 years. That lasts for the rest of their life. They have their name of the saint on which they were born. And if you ever really get interested, there are 366 Catholic saints. Just go down to a bookstore that has a calendar in Spanish. Buy the calendar, and on the bottom of each day you'll see a name. That is the saint of the day. There are a lot of those saints with the name Jesus, Jose, and Maria. And that's why, isn't every Hispanic name Jesus? Isn't every Hispanic name Jose? Actually, it's because that's their third name. And then their fourth name, their last name, is actually their mother's name. Their father's names get added if they really want to carry it. And if they get married, then they add their husband's name with the word "day" in between it. So in 1999, when my wife and I went down to Mexico as missionaries, and she had to make her visa entry. My wife was a widow, and so she had a hyphenated name in the United States. She was Terry, first name, Jean, second name, Winters Flunker, hyphenated. Well, she gets down to Mexico and she has to fill this out. So she was Terry, first name, Jean, middle name, didn't have the same name. They put in Winters Flunker, but they put that way at the end, because they had to bring in her mother's name, Nikolaus, and then her dad's name, Volz, and then put day, Winters Flunker. It would take 5 seconds for my wife to say her name. Terry Jean Nikolaus Volz de Winters Flunker. And then some people say, well, what do you call you? She'd say, Teddy, which was foreign to them. Normally they would have thought to call her Jean, because hardly anybody calls you by your given name. That's what your parents like. They would have thought to call her Jean. So she had to be intercultural and reflect, no, I prefer to be called Terry. No one's ever called me Jean before. Learning that, understanding that, gives us a little bit of insight. You've seen several pictures go across. All I've done is put together a variety of pictures of the places where we are working, while I share with you some of these stories. Let's go back to Pastor Cosillo. So he heard this song about Jesus. He wondered who Jesus was. He actually walked into the church, which is unheard of in Cuba. And he sat in the back of church, and when he was done, the pastor came back and talked to him. Long story short, a couple of years later, Frank is studying to be a pastor, while still working as an OBGYN. 6 years later, Frank wins the lottery. And in Cuba, the lottery means getting out of Cuba legally. Not on a rubber raft, not smuggled in bottom boat, but actually on an airplane. He wins the lottery. He has to wait 3 years for his ticket to be punched. The entire time, he's studying to be a pastor. He actually was serving the congregation in that town that he had walked by, called Pescadores de Hombres, fishers of men, until he would finally get that ticket stamped. Came to the United States in 2009. Didn't know a lick of English. Nada. He still had 1 year of his seminary training left. So in the United States, I got involved with teaching him, and a man by the name of Pastor Mark Gagline got involved in teaching him. He was called to Phoenix, Arizona to be a vicar, because at that time we knew that you can get by in Phoenix without speaking English. And Frank, his wife Martha, and his 2 children weren't speaking much English then. Well, guess what? He gets to Phoenix, and what happens to the children? They all learn English rather quickly. So much so that they got into Phoenix in January. By that following August, the daughter was enrolled as a freshman in high school at Arizona Lutheran Academy, ALA, and the son was enrolled as a 4th grader, I believe, 4th or 5th grader, at Grace Lutheran Church, 5 miles away. And they did not need assistance in the language department. Now, luckily, both of them are very smart. She actually is a nurse living in Miami, and Frank Jr., Franco, is in his 2nd year of residency as a neurosurgeon. That's mind-boggling, pardon the pun, that he's got those kind of smarts. Because they assimilated. Both children are already citizens of the United States. The wife, Marta, learned English as well. She became a medical translator in the United States. Frank wrestled, and he continues to wrestle with the English language. That's why Frank, unfortunately, will never be able to serve in the United States by himself. Because if he were to serve in a congregation where he would not speak English, he would be very effective for about 10 to 12 years. As soon as all those other kids came up and young adults that don't speak Spanish, or their Spanish is weaker, he could not serve them, would not be able to serve them, and they would disappear. And that's why in the United States we work very hard on being intercultural, and I'm going to say bilingual. Bilingual means that at any given time, a leader in the congregation, whether it's a pastor, his wife, another member, may use their Spanish. And it may very well be in something like a Bible class, a counseling session, very much one-on-one, or on the family. But everything else, unless there's a large majority of Hispanics in the community, like Santo Tomas in Phoenix, or like Waukegan, Illinois, or like the south side of Milwaukee, yeah, then they'll offer Spanish in worship and Spanish in English, or worship in English. But realize that on any given Sunday, that family can go either way, depending on. I often joke, especially at San Pedro in downtown south side of Milwaukee. I say, okay, you got 10 people in the family. Perhaps one Sunday only 7 show up. Probably in the car they're saying, okay, 5 of us. Yeah, we're going to Spanish service today. Next Sunday, all 10 show up. Nope, we're going to English service today. Who in the family wins? Majority. Majority wins. That's the way they're going that day. And the interesting thing is that even for a Latino in the United States, and I'm going to guess, and I'm pretty sure of this, talking to many other ethnic cultures, anybody in the United States after 2 or 3 years may not be able to speak it well, but often can understand 85 to 90% of what's told to them. So, and a Hispanic can walk into an English worship service. They may not sing. They may not read the responsive liturgy with you. But they understand. The words are not gobbledygook. They understand what's being said. Yep, I'm almost done and the last slide comes up. I'm aware, Pastor. Thank you for riding my time. 45 that can turn
way
into
past-
50,
I'm like
45 can turn into
4 or 5
50.
minutes past
I'm
that.
seeing it, I'm seeing it. Intercultural outreach and intercultural ministry is what I am strongly encouraging you as a congregation to think about. And in a minute, the last slide that's going to come up here after this one is going to lay out my reasons why. And for that, I'm going to step back by Pastor and read them because I don't have them memorized. But I'm encouraging you to do that because the community is showing that. The community is showing that we have ethnic minorities living among us. In fact, in some of these areas, we're talking about pockets of 45 to 50% of this area is Hispanic. So therefore, you're gonna hear Spanish being spoken. You're gonna hear the music. How do we do that? Number one, I'm not asking you to do anything new. I'm asking you to do everything you're already doing. A complete community approach. In other words, don't fear the language barrier. 2 reasons. One I've already said. Truth is, you can talk in a simple, slow English, and 98% of the people you talk to who look Hispanic are understanding you. They may not have all the gifts or the confidence to talk back to you until they get to know you. When they get to know you, then they say, hey, he's not going to laugh, that person's not going to laugh if I make a mistake. Then they'll talk with you. But prior to that, they'll understand almost everything. So language is not a barrier. Number 2, you got a guy and his wife who do speak Spanish. So if you ever feel like you're at the end of your rope and you just can't get in, say, wait a minute. You dial up the phone and say, talk to this guy. I have a half a dozen people spread throughout the United States that do that right now, unfortunately, with my phone number. So I have to answer the phone no matter what time or who it comes from, even if the number I don't recognize. So unfortunately, I get about half people wanting me and half people who want to extend my car warranty insurance. Oh, I play with those guys so much, it's not even funny anymore. Not even funny. I'm going to say also that culture is not a barrier. Because you've got somebody like myself who can help you walk through the culture, and I'll show you in just a minute. I provide, this is just the tip of the iceberg. I mean the top 0.05%. If you get interested in this and Pastor talks to me, I'll be glad to come back out here and spend 2+ hours with you talking about the Hispanic culture and how we can relate. I call it an awareness session. And it's open to everybody, from the littlest in your group to those who aren't so little anymore. We spend 2.5 hours together. We look at our own culture, we look at the Spanish culture, and we answer those questions that you might have. And then if you say, yeah, this is good, I'd like to try this, I'm even willing to train you. Because most of what you want to do, I've trained other people with. In the end, I'm not asking you to do a new ministry. I'm not asking you to start Spanish ministry. I'm asking you to do your ministry with an intercultural lens. What does that mean? You're already doing preschool. In fact, you're already doing preschool interculturally. Is that a place we can ramp up? And what does that mean? 2 very good questions. I just planted them. You can think about them. You're already thinking about, and yes, the plans will go in sometime and eventually they'll be approved, the Family Ministry Center. My goodness, that to me will be a playground for this community of opportunities. And I'll just throw a couple out there. Simple adult education. What does that mean? Hey, it could be teaching English. Very honestly, I don't think you're going to teach English. I think most people around here know a little English. I think you're going to help people improve their English. That's EIO, English Improvement Opportunities. There's an assumption that they already know some English. They walk in, I'll see where they're at, let's help you get better. What are your concerns, your issues? And I got a full curriculum for that. Financial Peace University. Why? The material's already in Spanish. In fact, Pastor probably wouldn't have to do the class in Spanish, just for that small group of people say, wait a minute, I can listen to you, but if I've got the translation right here, I'm really gonna get it. Okay, then you get it. Other parenting classes. And then honestly, 150 yards that way, you've got a wonderful opportunity to connect to this community interculturally. Number one, they're intercultural. And after speaking with a couple of their leaders on Friday, yeah, they are intercultural. And for the most part, from my perspective, they're actually thinking the right way. I sometimes run into communities where they're still in the concept of separating. Okay, the Spanish go over here, Vietnamese go over here. I don't see that at Iowa. Now, you get a little deeper, you might find a little bit. But for the most part, you got a wonderful opportunity over there. And it's right there, it exists. It's not something new. See, I told you I would get close to being done. It was 4 minutes over. I am, however, willing in the last 3 to 5 minutes, before we absolutely have to vacate this room, I have 2 questions for you before we move on. Question number 1. Did anything that I say here this morning surprise you? Like, whoa! You know, the typical light bulb on top of the head caricature? Yes?
Cost $500 to be baptized.
Okay. That's a good surprise. Also a terrifying surprise, but it's a good surprise. Other than the cost of grace?
No.
Good. If I didn't surprise you, that means that your lenses are already slightly multicultural, intercultural. And very honestly, I would expect that from a community like this. You know, when I walk around, Saturday morning I went jogging and I came across different ethnic races, not all of them were jogging. But it was not difficult for me to see a variety of different shades and colors on a Saturday morning running outside. We have a community like that. If your lenses are not intercultural, then we got other problems. Maybe problems too strong. We got other issues. And for that we need to talk about. Now, was there anything I said this morning that scared you? Yeah, that one sometimes. And here's where you can be completely honest.
I was scared, I can't remember.
I scared it right out of you, huh? After spending the last 3+ days with Pastor, I would have been surprised if something scared you. Because everything that he shared with me about you tells me that you're not afraid of trying other things. In fact, you've been in a situation and lived in a reality where you've already done several other things. So nothing here is going to shock you, scare you that way. Is there still a little bit of, I'm not quite sure? Yeah. There's going to be all that until we go to heaven. Some of it is our own personal comfort zone. Some of it is the fear of, well, if I try this, will anybody come? Those of you in first service already know the answer. Those of you in second service, you got to wait for the answer. Because that's part of my sermon. It is a true fear, but it's a fear that has an answer. Pastor left the room, so I can ask this one. Anybody have any other questions? I can take this as long as I want now because I'm the preacher. He can't. No, I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
No, I just wanted to make a comment. There's a couple of things that my students are always surprised by, and that is that the United States is the second largest Spanish-speaking country in the world.
Yep.
And something else is one of the social studies teachers is having a hard time explaining to her students what Hispanic ethnicity is and what a Hispanic race looks like, because we range everywhere from we are adopted into the culture, so you look like me, to so white you look like you belong
Me.
in. Yeah.
No, I have no problem. In Puerto Rico, I was the nickname was the cement post of Vista Mar. East Mars, the city I lived in.
At Rubio,
And Rubio, sí, El Güero, yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
to the deepest, darkest skin tones you can find. Hispanics range. There's a huge range of race and culture. And I think that's something that,
Yes.
that is very important to go into this with.
When I go to Mexico City, no one thinks twice about me because Mexico City is so intercultural. In fact, some people look at me and listen to my Spanish and say, "You from Argentina?" When I go to Monterrey, Mexico, I fit in like simple, peas in a pod. Because Monterrey, Mexico has a large Spanish peninsular presence, European Spanish. And a lot of those people look like me. And in fact, a lot of the people in Monterrey look like me, or I look like them. So yeah, it can run the gamut. Which is why, for me, talking about reaching out to Hispanics might be, it's almost too big of a bowl to get into. Let's just say we want to reach out to individuals who have a Latino culture, Hispanic culture. Whether it's fourth generation living in the United States, and for them their culture is reflected by the reality, yeah, getting up on Sunday morning for 8 o'clock, forget that. I don't do anything on Sunday before 10:30. Okay. I know some Anglos that think that way. Okay. I don't worry about that as much. Go ahead.
Well, living in this community for like 26 years, and my husband working, as a laborer.
Sure.
He had many opportunities to witness. We had a lot of Hispanic friends, but it was the culture barrier that happened that we couldn't get them to.
And that's my 2-hour awareness, 2.5-hour awareness session will identify that reality, very much so. And it's often more of a misunderstanding on our side than it is on their side. So how do we focus ourselves to be a little bit more narrow in our approach and then understand some things, which will make that a whole lot easier. In the end, look, God asked us to be ambassadors. He didn't ask us to pound the message in. He says, you're ambassadors. You just deliver the message. I'll take care of the rest, God says. Oops, I just said part of my sermon. Okay, amen. You all can go. We're done. I'm done. Actually, we do need to say amen because otherwise Pastor is going to be mad at me and I still have to live with him tonight. So thank you very much. We'll see you in worship. If you were in first service, it was a pleasure to meet you today. Thank you.